Hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because I was so enamored by Resident Evil Village, also known as H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Ass to Mouth, I'm gonna take a brief break from streaming myself losing at video games designed for small children so that we can ponder the greatest questions of our generation. No, not whether nutting in raviolis, then putting them back in the fridge makes you a semen saucier for shooting your skeety inside the ziti, but rather such poignant tribulations of our times as was Ethan's family life with the soup-making, Blumpkin-loving imposter Miranda, healthier than his marriage to the oh-so-she-walked-into-adorable original Mamma Mia, and perhaps most fedora-tippingly of all, was Miranda's attempt to cope with her egglessness by kidnapping and mutating other people's children into mindless monsters who only know how to consume, a metaphor for feminism as a whole, or simply the natural result of the matriarchy that she imposed on the titular village. While gamers understand what points, levels, and bad guys are, we often fail to heed the softly whispered desires of the game's developers. Resident Evil games of late fall into what fat, unkissable products of repeated child molestation often refer to as male power fantasies. Chris Redfield is a roided-up 13-year-old boy who does to Black Lives Matter protesters what literally everyone who pays an income tax would like to do to Black Lives Matter protesters. Leon Kennedy is a quip-spewing master of kung fu who can backflip over a zombie and nut in his pants 3 times by thinking of a tsundere flat-assed Asian woman before landing. Ethan Winters, however, fulfills the developer's truest and most difficult to fulfill desire, to go home and become a family man. Now, let's unplug the joke machine for just a second, babes. Being unmarried in your 30s is like being one lightning bug alone in a field at night. It has even become a running joke with fans that Chris's mission in life is to find someone, anyone to fuck his sister so that he can continue his family line. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Mia Winters was a flat-assed, butter-faced bitch in Resident Evil 7, but unlike you fools, Ethan Winters knows the answer to the riddle of steel, that even a narrow-behinded, broomstick of a woman will plump up all voluptuous and grab from behindable once you put a baby in her against her will. Pregnancy creates a wide-backed woman with the sort of succulent mother-bearing knees that'll make you say, "Oh my God," so enthusiastically that even the Lord Jesus would peer down from his cloud and finna bust a nut. Hallelujah! The Village of Shadows, which, appropriately enough, bookends our tale, warns of society's corruption of young white girls. First, by tempting them away from their family with the promise of juicy berries and thought accoutrement, only to imbue them with stanky fish flaps and a pod load instead. Thank Yeshua HaMashiach that the last beast the girl in our story encountered was a mechanical horse and not a mechanical dog. Otherwise, that golden cog she took might have been a ruby red knot instead. This hackneyed plot device serves to lay out the basic premise of the game, but if you put on your "it was real in my mind" yarmulke, you'll realize that as a family man, the only thing that could possibly spoil Ethan's familial bliss is the ever-present threat of his daughter growing up to become a smut. Now, hold on just a second, guys. I'm feeling a bit of a rumbling in my tumbling. Oh, it's delicious. Whew. Now, if you sophisticated gentlemen will pardon my momentary impropriety, I require but a moment to evacuate my bowels upon my porcelain chamber of woe. Whew! Hey, speaking of disposing of unwanted lumps of bodily waste, did anyone else find it weird that the first mission of Resident Evil Village is to ditch your baby so you can drink red wine with a woman who isn't your wife? Who does Ethan Winters think he is? My dad? For that matter, who does Rose Winters think she is, passing out in a homemade sweater while covered in powdered milk farts? Me after being raped by my Alzheimer's-stricken, yet unbelievably strong grandmother? There was also literally no reason for Chris and his highly trained team of unarmed white women exterminators to not just let Miranda continue pretending to be Mia. Perhaps they were simply trying to spare Ethan the horrors of ethnic food. Miranda's ciorba de legume is Polish for a whale's vagina after all, though if nothing else, I can appreciate that Resident Evil Village allows me to punctuate an argument with the death of my wife without having to pretend to be unable to put on a glove afterwards. Chris then snatches up Ethan's baby like a delivery boy for Comet Ping Pong Pizza, and the first part of our overly long intro concludes. Ethan, proving that he hath truly acclimated to the Polish way of life, awakens behind a flipped car and immediately steals somebody's phone. The way he stumbles drunkenly through the snowy forest reminds me of my childhood. After my parents sold their car to pay for gasoline, I had to walk 15 miles uphill through the snow every morning to get to finishing school. If I wanted to keep my knees warm, which is what I walked on since my family was too poor to afford feet, I had to find a fresh bear shit to kneel in. And believe you me, being knee-deep in a bear's hairy shit isn't nearly as fun as those guys in California might have you believe. And don't let this friendly little bungee jumping crow fool you, there is no safety for Ethan in the cabin ahead. Someone or something smashed up the place and left it slathered with bodily fluids like a me in the night. Can you imagine Ethan's terror entering an abandoned building while ferocious subhumans surround him like a real estate agent showing off a home in Detroit? After reuniting with our good old pal, the recycled asset bolt cutter, we finally meet our first villager. You may initially suspect that he's an American due to him speaking perfect English and casually gifting Ethan a pistol, but if you ponder deeper, dream just a little, you will realize that this villager can't possibly be American. Otherwise, he would not have shot at a home intruder without pausing to worry about whether or not a certain hue of urban folk might taint the jury pool at his pending trial. This brief shootout ends when our friendly NPC breaks through the glass ceiling like a woman who knows how to suck cock, and Ethan is banished to the basement like literally anybody who is watching this video. A wolfman then appears and bites off the two fingers that reminded him most of Miranda, and in my humble opinion, this is the most tragic loss of two fingers since that time I took a wrong turn and my whiskey tumbler smashed through my windshield and into some pedestrian's face. An onslaught of greasy village people then ensues, and not the kind of sensual, oiled-up village people you might read about on Chris Redfield's DeviantArt page, but rather the terrible kind that doesn't even know how to harmonize.
Hello! 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 Hello!
These lichen enemies are a play on words, wherein a lichen can refer to a half-man, half-wolf, while a lichen refers to the fusion of a moth and a fungus, which makes perfect sense once you consider that hobos are known worldwide for their skin fungus. Why, in my own youth, I once saw a homeless man so infested with mold that he had a huge pink mushroom growing right out of his pants that spat spores all over my face. The world's least annoying Hasidic Jew then appears and smites Ethan's moldy foreskin with his humongous Hebrew hammer until players realize that Ethan used to be a horror game protagonist just like Leon or Jill until he took an arrow to the knee. Luckily, this is the exact moment that all the monsters decided to Fortnite dance over Ethan instead of killing him outright. I can only assume that they then caught a plume of steam emanating from the backside of a small chihuahua in heat, or heard the enticing rustle of somebody opening a fresh pack of bacon strips in the distance, since they sprinted away for no other justifiable reason. The appearance of Sam Kinison in drag is an especially diabolical development for Ethan. This wall-stricken form is what Miranda looks like without her cocoa butter and TikTok filters, and our hapless hero nutted inside of her for months, never realizing that she was using her shape-shifting powers to transmogrify the inside of her pussy into a man's gritty, hairy, disgusting bunghole the entire time, thereby technically making Ethan a gay homosexual, which, as we all know, is the second worst sort of homosexual, right behind those small furry ones that live in trees and eat all the acorns that are rightfully mine. Subtle gameplay elements hint that Ethan must then collect 2 decorative NASCAR plates in order to enter the castle on the horizon. The first plate is conveniently left in a chapel, whereas I can only assume by all the photographs of sluts plastered to the wall that it was used as a target for Coombe. On his way to the slumber party, where the second plate may be found, Ethan accidentally stumbles upon the villagers' first waifu bait in the shitting corner of her filthy studio apartment. Now, I hope I am not saying anything unbecoming of a dapper gentleman of my caliber, but this bitch's booty is so concave and unsmackable that I can honestly say that I have seen more hip on an opotamus. Her father, Leonardo, is nearly as beat up as I would leave his skank daughter's punanarino, and he wields a machete as though in fear of being attacked by an especially surly coconut. Ethan hatches a masterful plan of hopping a fence to lead them to the relative safety of their neighbor's house, where the doorman Ulian draws a gun on Ethan, says he looks vaguely Italian, and that's close enough to black to cause a problem. Unfortunately, the owner of the home allows them inside. I mean, what kind of party has prayer, but not any slam pigs? No Mario Kart 64, and no Mountain Dew! For Christ's sake, Louise, the village is surrounded by mountains. Just send somebody out for dew, or don't invite me next time. Leonardo then climbs on the ceiling and attacks the other guests with the machete. Just like a wolf? You know, I get that these creatures aren't literally werewolves, but at this point, Leonardo is acting less like a misanthrope-lycanthrope and more like the Ninja Turtle he's named after, and that includes nutting on the pizza while the rest of the gang is sleeping, then smirking knowingly when Raphael asks why his slice tastes so much like asparagus and shrimp. Fortunately, Alina turns the tables on her father by blasting him in the face in the hallway by the garage for a change. At this point, the home catches on fire, and since Ethan is too stupid to open the garage door, he and Elena drive Louise's car directly into a load-bearing wall, thereby proving that Ethan is an even bigger homewrecker than Miranda. And she drank goop like it was Go-Gurt. Just saying. After dropping a bony-ass wind chime and a dress-looking slut onto her relapsing dad, Ethan hides in an attic like Anne Frank, but with an infinitely more believable setup leading to it. After engaging in an unholy ritual, equivalent only to placing 2 quarters in a Chuck E. Cheese skee-ball machine, Ethan is finally on the path to the castle and the literal booty that lies therein. But not so fast, gamers. No! Seconds before Ethan can escape the tutorial, an autistic Van Helsing knockoff with a fetish for bolts and nuts covers Ethan with scrap metal and spooch before dragging him away to yet another gameplay interrupting, plot espousing cutscene. Cloistered within her Eldritchian manor, Mother Miranda has gathered her 4 horsepersons of the apocalypse for their weekly bad movies and Uno night. Ethan arrived uninvited and without bringing any overpriced microbrew beer that smells like balls. Therefore, he must die. Like a cabal of CIA agents who have cornered a young boy who offended the Clintons, they briefly debate who will get to murder their captive. Perhaps by having him shoot himself twice in the back of the head. Ethan is sent down to Goblin Town, where he is expected to be turned into fresh ground American beef, but is saved by his wrists, which have been hardened from years of backhanding his flat-bootied wife. Upon achieving this great escape, players then encounter perhaps the sexiest character in the history of the Resident Evil franchise. Ladies, prepare your wallets for a merchant who actually is our greatest ally for a change. Your meat wallets, that is. This quantum singularity of flesh and capitalism single-handedly caused the McFlurry to go extinct in Eastern Europe. Meatballs trade scary stories of him around the campfire at night, and Hispanic Jews refer to him as El Abominacione Grande. You, however, may refer to him as the Duke. After selling Ethan some reasonably priced goods and allowing him to shotgun toke off of a fine Cuban cigar, rolled between the hairy thighs of Fidel Castro himself, the Duke informs Ethan of the specifics pertaining to Castle Dimitrescu, also known as Castle Wolfen Down My Kommunestein. Now, before we begin the deluge of disgusting jokes about the vampire girls, what their front butts probably smell like, and how I'd like to lose a pinky ring inside of the blonde one, let me grab a sock off of the floor and smear the following message off of my chest.
Is my mom turning into a black person?
And the moose door.
I'm about to bust.
Traditionally, dragons personify chaos. What with their interstitial nature of dwelling on the ground, flying up in the sky, and swimming in the sea simultaneously. In her own way, Lady Dimitrescu is a dragon of chaos. What with her long, neck-clenching legs on the ground, dangling beef curtain-esque wings flapping around in the sky, and of course the effervescent stench of fish she left in her President Taft-sized bathtub full of literal gamer girl bathwater. Perhaps at one point in your life you've yearned to gaze into the sun's incandescent splendor. Of course, you couldn't bring yourself to do it, because having looked directly into the sun's radiance, you'd have certainly gone blind. Believe me when I tell you, I can scry a woman's every genitalatic detail with just one glance, though a grope or two at the bus stop also helps. In short, my anal assist is clear. Lady D's butthole is like a glittering sun that you can actually look directly into. In fact, were all tall women as charming as she, I wouldn't have to drink quite as heavily as I do whilst masturbating to the WNBA. Now, I'm not just saying that because she's the one woman in the world who would actually enjoy all that blood in my jizz, but also because she literally has 300 pounds of pussy and ass. As a refined scholar, I must admit, even though Alcina has had more meat inside of her than the secret room behind the sawmill, I would gladly eat her ass, like a grave worm working up north through a casket. And not just because she had Taco Bell earlier, and even a second-hand bean burrito is delish. Attemptive gamers may discern Lady D is a huge fan of the band The Offspring, since her daughters are literal pretty flies for a white guy. The idea of making love to a mound of anthropomorphized bugs may gross you out, but frankly, sex with the daughters Dimitrescu wouldn't be the first time my foreskin was covered in flies. Don't ask why unless you got a warrant. Please understand my plight. The protagonist of the novel,
with a confederacy of dunces,
was so obese that he had zero sex drive and could only ejaculate by thinking back to his childhood memories of playing with his currently deceased dog. He was so far removed from engaging a woman intimately that his only prostate palliation was in projecting a single moment of happiness that he could never recapture. In a way, you preverts who make goddesses of these appealing abstractions are no different than Ignatius, jerking off to representations of women rather than chasing down the real thing, holding her in your arms and whispering, "Darling, I love you," then feeling her sweet breath on your face as she screams and stabs you repeatedly in the chest with her car keys. Like the proverbial Japanese man who fell into a tank of industrial lubricant, giving your nut to the idea of a woman rather than a woman itself, is a heavily lubricated Asian man. Wait, that's not it. Fuck, whatever. Sure, Alcina and her daughters represent alluring women in your mind's eyes, but they are merely digital representations. From there, it is not so far a jump for a man to think even lower, and not to representations of women. The brony phenomena is proof enough of that. Upon entering the castle, Ethan is immediately assaulted by a trans-exclusionary radical feminist who cries out for his man blood, despite the fact that, as a mold person, Ethan is technically full of hermaphroditical spores and hecking valid as a direct result. 3 mystery negresses swoop down on him like seagulls pouncing on a french fry, nestled perfectly between my buttock cheeks, oblivious to the snapped necks that await them. These embodiments of the phrase live, laugh, love drag our protagonist to Alcina's rumpus room, where she proceeds to drink his blood, complain that it's lacking in endochrome, and instructs the girls to not bother waking up Hillary for a sip. The girls then hang Ethan by his palms via conveniently placed meat hooks I can only assume were generally used for aging the occasional lutefisk or spiral ham. From this point forward, the player is free to creep around Dee's house, sniffing the chair cushions and patrolling thoughts at their leisure. Battling the sisters is a simple affair, not even requiring having to convince a police officer that they fell down the stairs and onto a pile of lit cigarettes. A little cold air and these mother buggers, who should have dressed in layers, get more of a full-bodied hard nip than Junko Ferrata. Wait, that's terrible, I'm sorry. Highlights of this segment of the game include realizing that this hot tub filled with blood is surrounded by wooden toilets for the refined debutante who enjoys bathing in the blood of children, whilst weirdos sit around her pooping in unison. Ethan discovering that not only does his right hand come off, but that it is also plug and play, and my favorite moment, when Dimitrescu trashes her own room after Miranda tells her not to kill Ethan, despite the fact that he murdered her daughters, nutted in her shampoo bottle, and spent about a week disguised as one of her shoes just so he could deep throat one of her elongated proboscis toes while she wasn't looking. After Ethan uncovers a knife so cool that even dead people want it, Lady D turns into a melted chicken parmigiana melted to a dragon's vagina. This literal bitch with wings insists that Ethan is the first man she's shown her true self to. This surprisingly intimate sentiment ought to have filled Ethan with a sort of willful exuberance I feel whenever a woman farts in front of me for the first time and I didn't have to pay extra for it, but Ethan being Ethan, he kills that skanko instead. This delectable crystallized mommy tummy and a literal baby bottle are his reward, but more on that in a moment.
Every night I turn myself into a werewolf.
Back in the city of Townsville, Miranda has once again disguised herself, this time as a former party girl who is finally ready to settle down. After Ethan complains that he almost died, grandmother Miranda asks him, "How can a man be almost dead?" "Well, honey, it's a little thing I like to call post-nut lethargy, which is, of course, why I always take a nap after watching reruns of Saved by the Bell." "One day, you will be mine, Lisa Turtle. Then into the pit of woe with you." As a reward for killing the last white family in the neighborhood, thereby opening it up for government-subsidized Section 8 housing, Ethan is given the key to the city. This key is notable in that it was originally designed to be utilized by Chris Redfield. How do I know this? Well, this key can be upgraded to open multiple locks, yet only takes up one inventory slot. and who else but Chris is known to have little room for inventory in the tight pockets of his pleather pants. The fully upgraded version even includes the French tickler, Mon ami avec des petites boules. Following the aromatic bouquet of indulgent cold gravy and hot pocket farts, Ethan is reunited with his plumpest pal and porcine peddler, the Duke. This sarlacc pit of snacks reveals that Rose Winters has been crystallized, broken into 4 pieces, and then suspended in orange Fanta in order to preserve her navy. Ethan then immediately drops his baby on her head, which kind of explains why she appears to suffer from Asperger's later on in the prologue. Fortunately, the Duke possesses a hitherto unknown variety of shrimp-scented adhesive that he offers to hot glue Rose back together with, so long as Ethan can provide the remaining 3 flasks and then spit on the Duke's right palm. After encountering a new variety of enemy who wears a bucket on his head just like a wolf, then killing a chicken because it couldn't give me an egg, Ethan unlocks the gate to the graveyard, and the quest for the next MacGuffin continues. Brief glimpses of his absent wife lure Ethan between a labyrinth of graves to a literal dollhouse where he is compelled to forfeit his memories of Mia and Rose in order to gain entry. Or, to put it another way, a duo of lying sluts who both require a fist up their ass to talk lead Ethan by the nose to a secret basement where he trips balls for about 5 minutes. Spoiler alert, this entire segment of the game is an illusion brought on by Ethan's inhalation of black mold spores in a manner not at all dissimilar from what I once thought up as my idyllic childhood in the Belgian countryside, but with actually just a couple of hours I spent feverishly attacking the kitchen staff at an international house of pancakes with my flaccid penis after I imbibed a bucket of the finest Jenkins in the alleyway by their unlocked kitchen door. Though you must admit, it was kind of nice of Donna Beneviento to let Ethan hallucinate the exact clues he required to solve her mind game puzzles. If I were the one manipulating Ethan with my red-hot psychedelic frappuccinos, I'd have driven him to suicide by making him think he was trapped in Resident Evil Revelations 2 instead. There, in the house of a woman so Italian that she keeps an emergency portion of spaghetti and meatballs embedded in her forehead, Ethan is confronted by a doll who wants him to stay with her forever, but doesn't even think to offer to let him see her butthole or go first when playing pox to entice him to stay. The primary puzzle of the dollhouse requires inspecting the lifelike texture of a titless Mia doll that only one person in the world has enjoyed. How do I know that one person actually enjoyed playing with this Mia doll? Well, I know that he thoroughly enjoyed the Mia doll because he left a film in her mouth. You don't get it. Jumping through a couple of metaphorical hoops activates the house's mood lighting, revealing a mottled tube of meat so long and stanky that it can only logically lead to the space between my own belly button and balls, or to the stomach of a monstrous fetus, which will yeet us and eat us. All too late do I understand the horror I've subjected boogers to my entire life. Back upstairs, Ethan plagiarizes Ted Bundy's courtship of several sorority girls in the 1970s by playing hide-and-go-stab-you in your head with the floating Angie doll. Once you jab a pair of scissors into Donna's prefrontal cortex, the true tragedy of Resident Evil Village unfurls, as the player realizes that they've murdered a big-tittied autistic girl who never talked and had her own home that they could have crashed in for free. Sure, she'd have forced me to watch Thomas the Tank Engine reruns with her for days at a time, but if my perfect waifu who I deprived of lifu were real, I'd have put a shoebox on my lap and given her a puppet show for a change. But such is the fleeting nature of amour. Ethan, like the Japanese woman who I pay $5 weekly to walk on my balls, then acquires 2 smelly little feet covered in goo. Completionists take note. If you can resist the Eldritchian urge to sniff Angie's panties before selling her to the Duke, a secret audio log can be played in Angie's model viewer window. A minuscule thought, dressed in a dish rag, so close that her stench fills the air. You can smell her, I tell you. Somewhere between the pungent spice of vanilla and the bitter sweetness of peanut M&Ms. There are worlds beyond this one, worlds as we've never seen, nor can we. Our eyes do not open far enough. Try it. Try holding your eyes like a Chinaman pretending to be white. But you'll never, ever see how something can be so kawaii yet so alive and hungry. She lusts for flesh, human flesh, and feasts upon all the fig Newtons a man has to offer. Damn her thighs! We are blind to them. Oh, horrible, horrible things. We must purge them from our midst. Order them off Etsy. Dress them like anime characters. Hot glue them. It's the only way. I know. I've done it. It works. It's worth noting that upon exiting House Ben Shapiro, creatures which appear to be first-year college feminists began popping up from underground, as though suddenly aware and furious that Ethan's privileges have gone unchecked, and the single attempt at this being an actual horror game comes to an end.
Would you like to make a wish?
The next area is covered in more vomitous green slime than Barber Chandler's panties, and introduces a four-legged Muppet which will briefly distract players from the disgusting Calper's caviar that they will tread underfoot for the next hour of gameplay. Salvatore Moreau is built up to be the diabolical mastermind behind the village's werewolf infestation, but this literal "he who smelt it" turns out to be a rabbit-strangling mama's boy, and his lab is merely the bodily fluid-slathered basement where he occasionally shoves black babies up the bungholes of confused villagers and also himself.
That tickles.
When he and Ethan first cross paths, players catch Moreau on the squiggly lines between the pay-per-view channels, and Moreau pukes up more row after realizing the sloppy pussy he'd been jacking it to all day was just the reflection of his own mouth.
Holy mackerel!
At this point, Ethan can just grab the flask containing Rose's arms, which I can only assume Moreau had been using to hold up his weird fish stick to make it look bigger when he sends unsolicited nudes to Elena, but Moreau refuses to let Ethan leave until he reads and critiques his erotic flipper fanfiction. Fortunately, much like myself in an elevator with a pregnant black woman, these great green globs of greasy, grimy Moreau nut bust as soon as you brush up against them. To escape from this radon death trap, players require a boat key, as Ethan will willingly wade balls deep through congealing blood in Lady Dimitrescu's basement, but not that placid lake water that fish had put their gross naked butts in. Ew! Players must then repair the windmills Moreau utilizes to blow his repugnant nut vapors all over town in order to drain the, pardon my French, the darn, which separates our hero from freedom. And as Ethan engaged in a three-fingered zipline, which just so happens to be the name of a sex move I invented in college for consorting with 3 Asian girls at once,
and welcome to Japan.
I finally felt at one with my character avatar. And to be perfectly honest, with the way Moreau pulls off a perfect swan dive, he's not the only one going sploosh. Moreau is more like it. Halfway through this section, players catch back up to Chris, who still won't cut the shit with Ethan because of literally no good reason. Luckily, a red-hot case of bath to mouth splits them up and the gameplay resumes. Moreau bloats up from all the cheese wheels he's been eating and aerates the area with abhorrent anal ambergris. After this fish flops, players return to his room only to find that Moreau had been keeping a black baby in a jar in an endearing attempt to grow his own Sheva Alomar. Truly, he and I were kindred spirits.
Oh, we are going to have so much fun together when you and I are together.
The two-way CB radio in a 480p resolution tube television then kicks in, and Heisenberg offers Ethan a deal. The final flask is located in a werewolf den on the outskirts of town. All Ethan has to do to retrieve it is prove that he and the game's engine can handle more than 3 enemies in a room at a time. Unfortunately for Heisenberg, he, like the Jewish Godfather, made Ethan a deal he could not afford. Having retrieved his daughter's torso in a jar, Ethan is then invited to Heisenberg's place to play some Super Nintendo and drink hot cocoa. Little does Ethan know, however, that the only game Heisenberg has in mind is Kablooey, and the hot cocoa is just heated up milk with chocolate sundae toppings stirred into it, which isn't the same thing, motherfucker! Having completed the Lovecraftian ritual of placing all 4 rose flasks into the primeval mechanism, which appears to predate all other architecture in the game, Ethan is rewarded with the arcane access to a scrapyard full of old beer cans and Lady Dimitrescu's crushed butt plugs. It's a good thing Ethan brutally murdered those 3 bosses in their homes, or they might have used the 4 flasks themselves in order to, I don't know, drop off their unwanted car batteries without him? The horror. The horror! With the chalice of rose androchrome in place, Ethan is now free to walk directly into an extremely obvious double cross. But don't read too much into this. All I'm saying is that Heisenberg seems like the kind of person who cries out in pain as he hammers you.
Oh, this is nice. This is the end. Okay. There's some things that are still unresolved here, guys.
There, in his office, which is also his bathroom, Heisenberg offers to use Rose as a weapon for killing Miranda. Take note, Heisenberg isn't all that bad, even though he's been murdering villagers to transform them into soulless automatons bent on destroying their former fellow men. He did build them a neat little Ferris wheel, which, as it turns out, is only the second deadliest known Ferris wheel, right after what happens whenever the guy who played Ferris Bueller gets behind the wheel of a car. Down the pizza cutter hallways and past the enemies who require red-hot nipple tweaks to kill, players can stumble upon Heisenberg's room and find out that Fagnito enjoyed experimenting with hairless farm boys, thereby turning these stable boys unstable? I especially enjoyed these ore-minding zombies with VR headsets, since I can only assume that, being typical virtual reality loving degenerates, they have been tricked into thinking that they are actually mining through the diaper of a gigantic furry anime girl. This makes blowing their brains out all the sweeter. Now, certain people have complained that the mini-boss of this area was stolen from a certain previously existing design. So let's ponder this together for a moment. Sturm is a tortured monstrosity with a propeller embedded in his chest and is capable only of pushing others away. After months of research, would you like to know the true inspiration from which Sturm is derived? You guessed it, Frank Stallone. Heisenberg then digivolves into a gargantuan robot who specializes in jumping sharks. I know some of you at home are asking if this is any worse than Simmons turning into a man-bear pig, a T-Rex, and then into a fly at the end of Resident Evil 6. And frankly, oh god, it is so much worse, because Village was pretty good up until this point. I'm not saying that this full metal autist ruins the game, but it is definitely the lowest point of the narrative, right behind that moment when you realize that you can't actually pour the liquefied pieces of rose into your bunghole in order to experience the miracle of motherhood as you painfully shit her directly back into her crib like any loving father would. Before this showdown of Metal Gear Rising retardants can ensue, Chris reappears to finally reveal that Ethan was fucking an imposter who wasn't Mia, and even more importantly, wasn't Chris's sister Claire, who is single and doesn't smell nearly as bad as you'd think by looking at her. No wonder they didn't bother reading the fake Mia her Miranda rights, because being Miranda, she already knew them. Chris was simply trying to protect Ethan, as involving an immortal who specializes in fighting this specific kind of mold monster might have proven dangerous. Fortunately, Chris also had surmised that the best way to further protect Ethan from danger is to send him directly up to the Mecha Schlobs the Knobzilla, while Chris stays behind to plant a small nuclear bomb directly below Ethan. Perfectly safe plan all around from what I can tell. Miranda then appears in the rubble of Heisenberg's remains, and instead of offering to let Ethan fuck her one last time while using that dipping tray mounted to the back of her head for scooping Tostitos into salsa with every thrust, she rips out Ethan's heart, just like a real wife would do after popping at a kid and instantly asking for a divorce. What the hell, Sharkweefa? I thought little Constipatia would bind us together, not tear us apart. The final level features Chris Redfield targeting distant tentacle monsters, furious that even they don't want to fuck his sister, going toe-to-toe with a Chalice Dungeon variant of that guy with the hammer, then tossing an N2 bomb at the gigantic black baby since he used up all of his regular N bombs while fighting the locals in Resident Evil 5. Radio chatter and last-second retcon notes reveal that Eveline from Resident Evil 7 was Miranda's failed attempt at bringing her own daughter Ava back from the dead. That Miranda used to shoot pool with the founders of Umbrella, and perhaps, most disturbing of all, that someone dissected their own shit on this table because they didn't want their perfectly good corn to go to waste. Mia then stumbles out of a jail cell, revealing to Chris that she was experimented on with a terrible new form of torture called hot wifing. You can consult your mother for more details. Chris then tries to cheer up Mia by telling her that her husband is dead, but she laughs in his face, knowing that the following cutscene will explain Ethan's potent Marty Stew powers. Apparently, Ethan isn't just figuratively a fun guy, but also literally too. But hey, what's the little last-second existential crisis among family? Personally, I like to think that if this scene went on a little bit longer, that Eveline would have told Ethan that he and the four bosses all grew up in the same orphanage, but forgot about it due to equipping guardian forces. Ethan then respawns in the rear compartment of the Paul Blart Shark Cart, realizing all too late that he was sleeping face down on the wet spot the entire time. In this final encounter, Miranda reveals that her daughter Ava perished from the Spanish flu because evil orange man Scranald Plumph tricked her into not wearing 4 face masks simultaneously while walking alone in the woods. The poor girl's parting words were purported to be, "If only I had trusted the science and taken my 7th booster shot, I could have lived." And after all the experimenting, torture, and outright murder that Miranda put the villagers through, her final attempt at reviving Ava failed miserably because Ava was never in the Mega Me site to begin with. Kind of an obvious oversight when you think about it.
Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Perhaps this game's strongest suit is the full-on embracing of domestic violence. Custody battles are never easy, but this one against Murgo's wet pussy nurse is actually lots of fun. And considering the fact that the last boss I made love to, then killed, was Lupita at the Broken Glass Factory, this swan song of Resident Evil Village is like an ephemeral walk down memory lane. With the final blow dealt, Miranda, like all women after pumping out a baby, then becomes a useless pile of dirt. Ethan pawns off his daughter on Chris, knowing that, as a gay homosexual, he will never actually molest her, then fulfills his duty as a white man by killing the gigantic Megami site black baby before it can grow up and ruin basketball for those of us who like to watch the game out of an appreciation of the fundamentals. This endearing self-sacrifice to secure the escape of his family will forever mark Ethan as a martyr and a true hero. At least, that is, right up until he appears in the post-credit scene completely unharmed. Whoopsie! The true damage done, however, comes when players realize that The moment Mia became a single mother, she probably dyed her hair platinum blonde and put on about 30 pounds, which, now that I think about it with my pants around my ankles, is probably an improvement.
This game is not fun.
Concluding a campaign as carefully crafted as Resident Evil Villages, with a DLC as shamefully slapped together as Shadows of Rose, is equivalent to having spent the entire night pummeling your wraith-carved bed with the gelatinous backside of a scrumptiously sumptuous strumpet, and just as you're about to roll over into your own glistening pool of asparagus-scented prostate precipitate, and fall into a deep contented slumber from which only an unexpected dog fart could possibly awaken you, you flip over your part-time lover and shit directly into her cunt instead. I know what you're thinking, my beloved viewer, whomst's belly I've longed to caress with the back of my knee, while we have all been tempted by our lesser demons to perform the forbidden erotic Choco Taco at one point in our lives. You're not actually supposed to do it, as that's where black babies come from. At least, that's where they originate, according to my sixth wife, who mysteriously disappeared along with our newborn son. His name, if I recall correctly, was the entire starting lineup of the Jacksonville Jaguars Jr. While one may have expected this journey into the Mega Mycete hive mind to have included fan-favorite characters who perished in the main game, like Donna Penne Aliento, Big Titty Milky Mommy, please smush me with your feet, or perhaps even a surprise cameo from a long-since retired character like Albert Wesker. Instead, this DLC focuses on Rose Winters, who had no characterization in the main game beyond her being a quest flag that craps his pants. Frankly, if we're going to go the Silent Hill 3 route of dealing with a teenage girl's puberty angst, why does this DLC take place in locations that Rose has never been to, rather than her school where she's bullied, the hiding place of her absent Mamma Mia, or perhaps the most glaringly omitted of all locations, my rumpus room so I can sniff her feet? There is a standard in writing called show, not tell. For example, I would never dare tell a group of fair mademoiselles huddled by the glass wall of a battered woman's shelter that I was about to flash them my succulent yam bag. I would simply show them my romantic intentions by flopping my penis across their faces like an AIDS-infested weasel of love instead. In Shadows of Rose, to effectively demonstrate that Rose misses her father, she wears the mold-slathered coat that Ethan died in. Much like how I'll sometimes don my sixth wife's favorite face mask, which, to the untrained eye, is often mistaken for a plastic bag, but I'll never forget how beautiful she looked wearing it the last time I saw her alive, screaming and trying to claw it from her face as the baby bottle of malt liquor she had just warmed up in the microwave rolled over and spilled onto the dirt floor of the shed I was keeping her in. Just give me a second. I'm sad. Now, did you catch what I just did? And by you, I mean the viewers, not the police. Nothing in this video can be used against me because I said it in a funny voice, thereby making it inadmissible in a court of law. It worked for Bill Cosby, and it'll work for me too, goddanggit. No, what I just did was contrast a sophisticated emotional response to trauma, which I have suffered after losing my sixth wife, her son, and 3 bags of my favorite limestone in one traumatic outing, with simply stating, hey fucker, I'm sad. I mention this because Shadows of Rose tells the player that Rose's powers are disgusting and not necessarily beneficial, but doesn't actually bother to show us why. If Rose shape-shifted into a hurtful anti-Semitic stereotype every time she sneezed or accidentally transformed a couple of her classmates into black mold monsters after they bullied her, thereby making her the first fatherless white girl to black somebody else for a change, then the player may have actually had a reason to care about Rose's quest to become a basic bitch. Unfortunately, the entire premise of this DLC hinges on Rose's hatred for her powers, and her motivation is flimsier than the structural integrity of these putrid period blood walls that I kinda wanna dip Tostitos in. At the outset of Shadows of Rose, also known in some circles as Amnesia, the Dark Descent into Mediocrity, a mysterious figure lures Rose into his laboratory, promising her that she can remove her unwanted mold powers. Supposedly, the only records of Miranda's research into Rose's powers are contained within the hive mind of sentient mold known as the Megamycete, which Rose can only access via the arcane ritual of Touch Crystal Get Dizzy. Rose then dreams of a subterranean dungeon, which one could argue symbolizes Rose's descent into her subconscious, but actually represents the game developer's devious desire to avoid rendering new assets. After a brief run-in with her own clone, festooned in its best Gregorian monk drip, some older and busted clones of Rose appear and start sucking the life out of the younger Rose clones so that they too can become feminists. Now, mayhaps if I have fallen out of touch with modern gaming, for real, no cap. Back in my day, after all, bussin' was just something we did inside of fat women's, whether they wanted us to do it or not. But the events which follow this tightly paced introduction are so underwhelming from both a narrative and gameplay perspective that I can best summarize the quality of Shadows of Rose by smacking myself on the nutsack with a wooden spoon so softly that it doesn't even make me shoot my spoony kumis. I suspect that the writers did not know what to do with Rose as a character, and the set pieces she navigates come off as generic as a result. They went full retard with these overt visual metaphors, but forgot that they're supposed to be based on somebody's personal trauma. Rose has no reason to visit Castle Dimitrescu. The dioramas begging to be hot glued in House Dan Marino are a lazy cop-out from rendering a high school level, and Ava at the end of the dollhouse level has an abandonment complex to which her level has no connection. In fact, the only trauma voraciously on display in this DLC is my own personal suffering from having played it. The title, Shadows of Rose, implies that the player will uncover Rose's shadow, perhaps her shadow self in the Jungian sense. Carl Jung supposited that the aspects of an individual that they reject, despite possessing, creates a sort of secret self or shadow self that only the individual can truly know. This shadow self could come in the form of a policeman who breaks the law, a fitness expert who binge eats in private, or a video game reviewer who is secretly terrible at video games. However, when it comes to Rose Winter's shadow, my flaccid pecker casts a longer shadow on a cloudy day. Think of it this way: Shadows of Rose throws dozens of Rose clone zombies at you, which are never particularly scary or compelling to interact with beyond the initial reveal at the outset of this DLC. Had the DLC included a single Rose clone instead, her gradual transformation into a zombified husk would have actually had an emotional impact. And fittingly, Miranda's desire to recreate her own daughter would have caused her to create this clone of Rose as a surrogate, only to destroy her. This Shadow of Rose could have embodied all of Rose's fears, doubts, and personality flaws. Instead, these mass-produced clones only serve to represent the developer's desire to artificially extend the length of this DLC. They lacked the courage to release an hour-long powerhouse of an epilogue like Resident Evil 7's End of Zoe, and we are stuck with this shit heap, which is more padded out than the review you are currently watching. Furthermore, the entire premise of the DLC is flawed. The Chinese knockoff of the Duke tortures Rose clones in hopes of forcing them to manifest Megamycete powers. The endgame of this is to provide a copy of Rose viable for transmogrifying into a reborn Ava. However, the main campaign proves that this is impossible due to Eva never joining the Megamycete in the first place. Miranda's characterization has regressed to a state from before her defeat at the end of the main game, whereas she was once a desperate woman mourning the loss of her daughter and grabbing at her last hope, no matter how slight. she is now evil for the sake of being evil. And she doesn't even offer to breastfeed Rose one last time for old time's sake. And after spending half of the dollhouse level being chased by Mia dolls who plainly have morning wood, is a little mother love too much to ask for, Capcom? Miranda literally weaned Rose, revealing that her intention is to actually adopt Rose as a surrogate daughter at the end would have been more interesting. Instead, Miranda does a backflip, is slapped by Rose's last-second Devil May Cry powers, and dies again instead. I just don't get it, Capcom. How are you this lazy? I get that Rose yearns to leave the Mega Mythete Hive Soul in order to join the soulless modern female hive mind, but no amount of likes on TikTok are worth putting out a DLC this lousy. Rose Winters is a drop-dead gorgeous 10 out of 10 piece of please lock me up, I don't even care anymore bait, who is inexplicably unpopular at her school, probably because she hasn't figured out that she could become popular simply by bottling and selling her farts. As a result, I just plain don't buy into her suffering. Any girl that pretty and that devoid of a father figure would have been extremely popular at my high school. Hell, being that her name is Rose, she even has a literal rosy palm. Now, that's not to say that this is all bad all the time. The subtle touches are there. Unfortunately, they are grossly overshadowed by the generic horseshit, which is so patently rubbed into your face, it may as well have been my yam bag the next time you're sleeping. On the positive side, I can appreciate how Capcom enabled sensitive gamers like myself to surmise that it is Ethan contacting Rose from the start, as once these mystical glowing text messages begin to appear, anyone other than Ethan sending a cutie pie like Rose untraceable text messages would have had the moral obligation to send her some unsolicited dick pictures as well. The dollhouse begins with an apt visual metaphor to Rose's buried childhood, demonstrates Rose's lack of social skills as she passes beneath these dangling hands, just begging to be high-fived, but ultimately left hanging limply like my nuts on a hot summer's day. The level set in Rose's childhood home alludes to, but never actually reveals, the unspeakable horror of Rose possibly uncovering her dad's Google history. This dangling prolapse that queefs out Rose clones reminded me that I had to pick up my mama from the airport, and perhaps most sophisticated of all, the revelation that Evelyn persists within the Mega Mythete and is jealous that no one joined her second life instance in the hive mind, save for that fish guy who kept asking to lick her feet, was somewhat wholesome. Ethan's appearance, the final fight, and the resolution are exceedingly lackluster. The reveal that Kay was an illusion and that everything happened in Rose's head directly contradicts her awakening with her father's wedding band clutched in her palm, unless, of course, it had somehow been embedded inside of Rose when she was an infant, in which case Ethan belongs in jail. A lazily recycled ending from the main game ensues, which doesn't even go further than the original cutscene. In my opinion, which is also a fact, this DLC should have had an option for Rose to side with Miranda and take Ava's place properly. Not only would a second ending have provided replay value, it could have also been the result of copying the mechanic in Silent Hill Homecoming, where the player could choose to punish or forgive certain characters.
I did not hit her.
Overall, if I had to compare Shadow the Rose to another Capcom horror game, I would say that it is a little bit like that flawed gem Haunting Ground, but only in so much that there's a fat retard drooling over the protagonist, although in this case, it's me. Now, before we conclude like a homosexual at an orgy of Jim Varney impersonators, by finishing in earnest, I would like to thank you all for joining me today. I know that I haven't been uploading as much as any of us would like, but keep in mind, that's because I am incredibly lazy. No wait, that's not it. I wanted to end this oversized diatribe by saying how grateful I am for all of you who stuck it through the long wait between reviews, and for the new guys who showed up for the vampire horror jokes. Be a pal and share this video with your buddies. Toss a penny at me on Patreon, so I can afford to commission some more big-need Lady Dimitrescu fan art, or maybe even check out one of my novels. Read all 3, and your brain will grow so big that you'll probably die. And that being the case, you wouldn't have to suffer by playing Shadows of Rose, baby. All the pertinent links are provided in the description below. Until next time, thanks for everything, and goodbye!